Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Selamat Hari Raya to all of you who have celebrated. I hope you guys have a good celebration despite the movement restriction. My name is Ivy. I am the research director at REFSA, which stands for Research for Social Advancement. We are a non-profit think tank, and our work focuses on socio-economic policies as well as institutional reform in Malaysia. So if you have been following us, our webinar, this is actually our 6th webinar since MCO has been announced on March 18. As you have probably seen from the slides just now, we have actually been having quite some good discussions about the impact on COVID-19 on our country, as well as on the various issues. And today we are very happy to be co-organizing this particular special edition with Undi 18, discussing yet another very pertinent topic, and that is what lies ahead for Malaysian youth post-COVID-19. I think much has been said about the impact of COVID-19 to our lives and also to our economy as our country, but we know that young people will be particularly badly hit by this crisis, and therefore it's very important that we also take a youth-centric approach when we formulate our policies. So before I pass the time to the moderator for today, Tama from Undi 18, I would just like to invite you to take part in the survey that REFSA has just launched. My colleague has already shared it on the chat box, but I will just ask him to share again. Essentially, we would like to hear from you. We want to learn a bit better about how you are doing in the midst of this crisis. So if you are between 18 to 35 years old, please just spend 5 minutes to help us to fill up the survey. This will actually really help to inform our research and our policy recommendations. And also please help us to share with your friends and colleagues. So with that, I will pass the time to Tama to moderate the session and also introduce the speaker. Take it away, Tama.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ivy. So hi, everyone. My name is Tarma, and I am the Advocacy Director and co-founder of Undi 18. I'll be your moderator for a great session today, looking at the impacts to young Malaysians as a whole, right? Because let's face it, we're looking at a very serious crisis that has long-lasting impacts in terms of how we do business, in terms of the economic projections as a whole, in terms of how young Malaysians see themselves in the workforce. And to discuss these very important, very relevant topics, we actually have 3 great panelists with us today. We have Dr. Melati, Amirul, and Shireen. Let me go through very quickly, just a short bio or short introduction about them. So Shireen Dato Abdul Ghani is the CEO and co-founder and director of Surga Innovation. Surga Innovation is the entity behind the creation of gigxglobal.com, a talent platform enabling the gig economy for high-value fractional work, connecting with experts and professional talent. Shireen was formerly the Chief Executive Officer of Talent Corp. Our next panelist is Dr. Melati Nungsari. She is an Assistant Professor of Economics at the Asia School of Business in Kuala Lumpur and a research affiliate at MIT Sloan School of Management in Boston. She is an economist specializing in industrial organization, market design, labor economics, and public policy. And last but not least, we have Muhammad Amirul Rafiq Abu Rahim, who is a research associate at Khazanah Research Institute. He holds a Master of Science in philosophy of mathematics and ethnomathematics from University Putra Malaysia, and a Bachelor of Science in Statistics from University of Technology Mara. All right, thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us here today and being willing to share their knowledge. And also thank you very much to all attendees, right, for spending your Wednesday night listening to this topic. So my hope is that we'll have a vibrant conversation, and I want to listen to or take as many questions as possible. So whether you're watching on Facebook, whether you're watching through Zoom, please feel free to comment on the question that you might have about the panelists. You can identify a specific panelist if you want, or if you want to ask a general question, that's fine too, right? Also in the Q&A, there's also a feature where you can upvote and sort of like highlight certain Q&A or questions that you like, right? So you can also do that to get the better questions prioritized, so I can take notice of it and I can ask it to the panelists, right? So I think that's clear, I hope. All right, so let's start with our first panelist for today, Mr. Amirul Rafiq. So I will give the stage to him so he can speak a little bit about his research and about the impacts of our current economic realities to young people in Malaysia.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Tharma. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening to everyone. I think it is also not too late for me to wish Selamat Hari Raya to everyone, especially to our Muslim fellow. First of all, I would like to thank REFSA for inviting me today. It is actually such an honor for me to be a part of this discourse together with our two esteemed panelists, Dr. Melati and Puan Shereen. Hope I could learn more from both of you. I will begin my discussion today with a quick overview on the challenge faced by young Malaysians before the pandemic and how the COVID might accentuate the situation. I would also share some of our findings from our publication on the school-to-work transition of young Malaysians, which to showcase the youth aspirations towards job before the pandemic happens. So as we all know, the transition from school to work has already been difficult and challenging process for young people, even long before the pandemic, right? So from almost 15 million workforce in Malaysia that we have in 2019, about 508,000 of them were unemployed, and 60% of them were youth aged between 15 to 29 years old. The youth unemployment rate keeps increasing over the years. Like for instance, the rate of unemployment among those younger age of youth between 15 to 24 years has reached double digits, more than 10% since 2015. And unemployment among the older youth, which we hope that this cohort would land into a good job after graduating, those who age between 25 to 39 has also been above the total unemployment since 2013. This phenomena has shown that the high unemployment among youth has already taken in place even long before the pandemic. At the same time, as youth face difficulties entering the labor market, the employers report they face problems in recruiting both skilled and low-skilled workers. And therefore, employers are relying on migrant workers to fulfill the low-skilled job, especially. With that, we also see more and more youth are going into less secure and more vulnerable forms of work. There are growing numbers of youth in informal sector. The available statistic from the Department of Statistics shows that more than 50% of workers in informal sectors are those between 15 to 34 years. And our survey findings on the school-to-work transition of young Malaysians that we conducted in 2017 and published in 2018 reveal that more youth are going into temporary, part-time and casual employment. Even as working as own account workers. These are all in the informal and gig economy. Taking note that, of course, this informal or non-standard form of employment would provide new opportunities or new type of jobs, but we have to acknowledge that this kind of works offers limited access to labor and social protections. I would therefore like to share some important findings from our survey that we published in 2018. As I mentioned earlier, this is just to showcase the scenario and on youth aspirations on towards jobs before the COVID-19 happened. The first one is youth aspirations towards jobs have shifted as they become older. So in our school to work transition survey, we survey youth in education institution and youth who already in the labor market. So we see that there is evidence of shift in aspirations towards jobs once they become older or entering the labor market, and they are seen to become more realistic about job once they become grow older. This is, however, for me personally, indicate that the weakness of our labor market in providing a good or decent jobs for the youth. And our findings also shows that youth are even willing to lower down their reservation wage once they entering the labor market. And second point that I think interesting to share is on the youth are actually not wanting high-paying job, because based on our findings, we asked them on their aspirations, what are the important characteristics of good jobs. So the high income only ranks 4th important characteristic among others. So it is below than the work-life balance and interesting jobs to do. This is contradict with anecdotal evidence out there, where a commonly cited reason for high youth unemployment would always that young people have unrealistic wage expectations, and the employers keep on complaining that our fresh graduates are asking for too much. And our findings also indicate that even the reservation wage is only about 1,500 for young workers and 1,700 for job seekers. This is the figures is very fairly low, and the actual mean for those who are already working lies only about 1,800. And we also found that many young workers earns below their reservation wage so as to get jobs. And the third point is that young people should not be considered as choosy about jobs when most of them are overeducated on the job that they are currently doing. This is what we call as a mismatch. When we found 90% of those who are working in the low skill type of jobs are overeducated. That means they are working below than the qualification that they had. The last but not least, Malaysian youth believe that foreign workers are threatening to their job opportunities, and they clearly want the expat job, of course, because they are offering better perks. And when they do not want the migrant job, it is because the job are 3D and offering a low pay. So based on the scenario, I think current and post-COVID-19 would worsen the situations. Currently, we have almost about 5.6 million youth who are already disadvantaged compared to the overall workforce. And the current crisis would have amplified their vulnerabilities. Finding a job, especially in times of crisis like we face today, is not an easy process. And the country have shown that the average duration of unemployment has been fairly acceptable, with fallen in longer term employment, with more and more people will be less likely to be unemployed for the period of 6 months or longer. And we also know that delays in finding initial employment and long spells of unemployment have long-term impact for their career prospects, and will give lifetime on their lifetime income and also the social mobility. In fact, we have so many historical evidence from around the world that on the dangers posed by a generation of young people that's scared by joblessness, increasing distrustful of the economic and political system. There is there is a few indicator or assumption or prediction made by various organizations, right? So recently, the Economic Federation, the NEF, has warned that the job market will be bleak for fresh graduates after the MCO is lifted. Job opportunities will be close to zero as employers are implementing number of cost-cutting measures and they are not hiring. So these are all the scenario that in the post-pandemic, which is, I think, would be very difficult for youth and the fresh graduates in particular. The labor market would be tightened and wage suppression will be prominent. Yeah, I think that is from me.
Awesome, great. Thank you very much, Amirul, for giving us an overview about our economic situation that we're in. Just a very quick clarification question, I guess. So I think you mentioned just now that a lot of young people are blaming foreigners for the lack of jobs that they have, right? But also you said that foreigners tend to go for lower skilled, lower wage jobs on the spectrum, whereas the unemployment rate for Malaysians tend to be people who are overqualified, which means that degree holders who tend to be looking for more skilled work. So do you think this is a sort of like a problem solution mismatch where we are angry at foreigners, whereas the problem is somewhere else? Or do you think that this sort of anger is, I guess makes sense, right? Because from the data, it sounds like there's a mismatch in terms of the anger versus the actual target market in terms of skilled versus unskilled. Yeah, maybe you can comment about that.
I think I can bring that question into the scenario on why our Malaysians are willing to do 3D jobs in Singapore. We have about 200,000 of daily commuters from Malaysia to Singapore, and it was found that about 40% of them are working in mid to low skills job. They are motivated mainly by higher wages. This is where I mentioned just now, when our youth don't want the migrant workers job, is because of the job are 3D and offering lower wages. And this is a limited example. It does suggest that current wages or situation in Malaysia may be too low to attract the local workers.
Okay, understood. Perhaps again, I can try to push you a little bit on the idea of young workers who are overqualified, right? What are some structural problems, or what have we done wrong in the past maybe 10, 20 years that young Malaysians who, because we've prepared them with all these degrees, we prepared them, said, okay, let's subsidize higher education, let's give them, let's make sure that that they have, or we have more young Malaysians graduating with degrees, masters, and even PhDs, yet we don't have the jobs for these young Malaysians. What do you think went wrong with our planning economically?
I think there are, of course, many factors contribute to it, but I think the most significant contributor would be the job market condition in Malaysia. We have producing more and more graduates that is entering the labor market significantly increased and have been surpassed the total number of jobs we created every year. So like in 2018, for instance, we have about 290,000 graduates with tertiary education entering the job market, while we have only have about 99,000 of high-skilled jobs in Malaysia during the period. And most of the jobs created are for adult cohort, which is age 25 years and above. This, I think, would explain how the mismatch and youth unemployment scenario happens.
All right, great, awesome. Thank you very much, Amirul. Sorry, I think Dr. Melati wanted to jump in real quick to add in about the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think there is a very dire need in Malaysia for us to evaluate why everybody needs to go to university. So I think there is a sense in our community that a lot of people need degrees to be acknowledged formally in society. And I think the fact that we have, people with like PhDs applying for like very, very entry-level jobs in Malaysia suggests that perhaps we have too many universities. As somebody who works at university, that's a bit of a scary thought, but I think there is some reflection I think that needs to happen with, do we actually need people to have certificates, or do we actually need people to just have skills? So yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
Agree. I think that's a great point, right? In terms of our preparation for the workforce versus the actual job market out there. Was there a policy mismatch with the actual reality of the situation? So thank you very much, Amirul and also Dr. Melati. But our next panelist, they'll be doing an introductory presentation is Shireen. So just for the attendees or for the audience, please put in more of your Q&A, more of your questions into the Q&A. We'll be taking them after I go through the panelists. So don't worry, I'm not ignoring you guys. I'll be taking you guys soon. So let's hear from Shireen.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamualaikum. Selamat Hari Raya for those who are celebrating. I hope you had enough food and rendang and lemang and all that. I certainly did. Thank you for the earlier presenter and the information that you shared. What I will do is I'll share a bit of slides because I'm dyslexic, so visual cues help me structure my thoughts. So I will do a little bit of the slides and then we can have a conversation. So let me walk through the slides. Are you seeing the slides? Are we good? Hello?
I think we can't see the slides yet.
You can't see the slide yet. I can see the slides. Okay. While I do this, let me just stop. Yep, you see it? Okay, good. So what lies ahead for Malaysian youth? So in my time in Talent Corp and also in my time in Khazanah, we think a lot about people in the workforce, especially young people. And there are a few things that we need to look at a macro level. So how do we create the demand, the opportunities for people who are working today and going to prepare themselves for work for the future? I'm glad Dr. Melati spoke about skills rather than university education and all that. But unfortunately, a lot of our employers still look at which university did you graduate from, and then that's the starting point of how they get recruited. So we have to think about how we change that mindset. There's also some discussion about the mismatch. How do we bring in the right talent at the right time with the right role? And people who work independently, there's some questions coming through on the gig economy. How do we help them to sort of sustain their income, look at social safety nets so that people who work in the gig economy are reasonably protected and have all the sort of the social safety net that is due to them. And then the end of the sort of discussion is how do we develop talent, leadership, well-being, look at things that matter. So when I was given this topic, and then Ivy spoke to me about how are we going to address this post-COVID. So there's a lot of issues that we're trying to think about. And I like the Chinese characters of the word crisis. So it's danger and opportunity at the same time. And you see the character when you say danger, it's like very defined, the strokes are defined and strong. When you look at the opportunity, there's a lot of things that come out of it. So I'd like to actually look at that as, starting our conversation on how do we look at danger. That means we protect our survival and protecting our livelihoods today. We spoke about the social safety net earlier, and then securing safe and stable future for everyone. The opportunity part, as you can see, that a lot of things have changed now. The work in terms of how we do our work, what it means to us as individuals, our roles, our skills, our expertise. What does it mean in the work environment? We're all doing Zoom, we're all doing, a lot of things online. There's flexible hours. So all these three elements of workplace in the workforce are coming together and being disrupted, and accelerated in terms of the changes while we are in this pandemic. So where do we look at the right kind of policies so that we support everybody in the workforce? When I look at young talent, I think that the youth or young talent is obviously the foundation of any society. So, the emerging sort of, talent that comes through into the workforce, it actually defines the country's future and our survival. And we need to look at, real policies, strong sort of support for young people to develop their skills and get a fair share out of the economic pie. It's an asset, always, right? And how do you then look at helping young people who will be the highest impacted by economic shocks. And I've been through 2 economic shocks in my lifetime. So thank you for lowering the average age of this panel. I'm glad to be part of you guys. But those are economic shocks. So I went through 2 economic shocks, but this time around, it's, as it's unprecedented, people say, right? So how do you then overcome this economic shock and, survive? Because we talk about, people now working in the informal economy, people now looking for opportunities, and young people are well placed, I think. If you remember the character of danger and opportunities, I think the young people will be resilient and they will come out of this better. Why? Because technology, you are digital natives, you can embrace technology faster than any generation. So that's where you are well placed. So that's the opportunity. Where do we look at how we help young people plug into these opportunities? There are some sectors with growth potential. So obviously digital tech, e-commerce companies, they are looking for young people who are digital natives, who can embrace technology faster than others in the workforce. Global business services, the outsourcing sector, I've been talking to a lot of employers who are, recruiting. So these are kind of sectors that are growing. How do we then channel young people or the entire workforce to actually look at sectors that are growing and in demand? Investing in skilling, upskilling. Now we look at skills, not so much your academic qualifications. I do agree. We need to change the mindset of employers. We need to change the mindset of, even our parents and all that, to think beyond just the academic qualification. Opportunities beyond your comfort zone. Do the new economy type roles. We have to be resilient, especially in our professional, emotional, mental, and physical state, and invest in our own self-care. So that's my bit, and I'm happy to take questions and have a nice discussion with everyone. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much. Okay, I just want to try to ask 2 questions. So I think the first would be, how is it that I think policymakers can best create policies that protect gig economy workers, but at the same time not to overregulate? How do we strike that balance? Like, for example, I give an example of how we perhaps try to overregulate. For example, the whole food panda fiasco that happened last year, where the government tried to intervene, and then that didn't really end up well. But at the same time, there is a need for certain levels of regulations to protect workers. How do we strike that balance?
It's a tricky balance, because really people who are in the gig economy, they don't belong to any organization. So then, the policies today, our labor laws today do not protect people in the informal economy, but they are still a participant in the economy. They still contribute to the economy. So we really need to look seriously on policies that then, and change our labor laws to really, broaden its interpretation, that regardless whether you're in a formal or informal economy, you are contributing to the growth of the country, and you need to actually have protection. So a lot of the platforms, as you can see today, don't really think about that for the people who work, who transact on their platform. There is, the care needs to go in. People who develop platforms need to think very seriously about how do you engage, people who transact on your platform, and really put in the care and the social safety net as a means to ensure that you attract the right kind of talent and you protect their rights and their interests. The responsibility goes to the private sector, people who actually manage and develop the platform. So I'll talk a little bit about GigX Global, just a few points there. In our platform, we have social safety nets in terms of the EPF coming through, pension funds, insurance, people with no credit ratings. If you work in a gig economy, you don't have credit ratings, so therefore it's difficult for you to get loans and all that. So savings and things like that. So we look at that as our offering to the people who work in the gig economy, because it is important for them. So I put it back to the people who actually then transact on the platform and the government to have those kind of regulations and the policies in place.
Awesome, great. Thank you very much. I think I'll ask my question later, I guess, for the interest of time. All right, but thank you very much. Really appreciate your overview. Very interesting thought about the future of work, right? So I'd now like to invite Dr. Melati to share her research. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Do you have my slides or should I pull my slides up? Ivy? I didn't know whether, I mean, I can.
I think it's better if you put it up.
All right, okay, cool. So hi, everyone. I'm going to try and sort of make my, my portion of this pretty short because I want to, let's see, sort of leave it a little bit. So basically all I'm going to do is, talk a little bit about my background and sort of, what I have experienced. I was once upon a time also young. I'm still young-ish, not really. But, sort of maybe we can have a chat about sort of, how I got to where some of the solutions, I think some of the problems we're seeing right now and sort of how I view in particular entrepreneurship. So I was born in Penang. I spent actually a lot of my time in the US and I came back to Malaysia through Town Corp. So Shireen actually was the one who approved my application to come back to Malaysia through this program called the Returning Expert Program. But so, if you have any questions, sort of migration, brain drain, is this a good time for us to pull Malaysians back home? Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But sort of my background basically is economics with a focus on labor issues. So I'm a labor economist who also does sort of industrial organizations. So I look at sort of how businesses work, how does sort of the labor aspect work, how does discrimination in the labor market work. And one thing I found basically coming back to Malaysia was that I had to sort of reorient my whole worldview on, the importance of research to asking, crucially, what is the most important question to be answered in Malaysia, and I landed on supporting vulnerable populations. So I work a lot with refugees, with migrant workers. I work a lot with sort of, what we call the B40 population. And in particular, a lot of my research in the past year has focused on entrepreneurship, particularly because I'm also attached to MIT in Boston. And MIT has this, amazing curriculum where they train and churn out all these fancy CEOs and blah, blah. So, I was thinking, what is one way we could sort of bring that back and repackage it, Malaysianize it, and sort of, try to get people to start thinking about entrepreneurship as a way to solve problems, right? So I'll talk a little bit about that, but basically through, sort of my research at ASB, I kind of landed on this idea of entrepreneurship. So as I tell you a little bit about what I think the youth should be worried about post-COVID, I'll just kind of put this up here. So we run this free entrepreneurship program actually at ASB, funded by Citi Foundation. We this year are giving out, I think, 10 grants worth 10K each. So we're giving 100K worth of grants if you complete the program and sort of meet certain criteria and stuff like that, but you do have to complete the program. The program is online, asynchronous. So if you sort of look at the QR code and look us up on Facebook, you'll find sort of details on what has happened before. We've trained over 600 people, I believe, at this point. And we also have a webinar on small businesses called Tauke Talk, which is talking about, how people, who basically could not find jobs they wanted to do in the job market and sort of how entrepreneurship kind of helped them get out of that. So it's based off of the MIT model, kind of Malaysianized to what we have right now. And so that's basically it for me. I just kind of wanted to give an overview of sort of what I've done, and we can sort of, you can kind of pick, and maybe Tharma can sort of pick at some pieces of sort of, my journey, and we can talk more about that. But I did kind of want to mention for young people, with COVID, right? I mean, I think you hear this a lot, like, COVID is unprecedented. You don't know what's going to happen. And it's true, right? Like it's this like crazy thing. And I think there was a talk, I believe by a lot of economists, very fancy World Bank people who were talking about, like, what should governments do, right? Like, is a lockdown the most optimal thing to do? What kind of stimuluses should we have? And I think the consensus was that nobody really knows. So I think, so, the thing is, like, I'm here to tell you sort of what to expect, but I don't know, right? But I do know one thing, though, which is that we will eventually get out of this. And I think for young people, it's very important to think about the short term, meaning to get over sort of the COVID hump, versus a long term, which is sort of, what you want to be doing for the rest of your life, right? So in the short term, maybe you accept jobs that aren't so great, right? Maybe you do more gig work than you wanted to, right? Maybe you actually will end up liking it, and that will be something you do for the rest of your career, right? But what I'm saying is that you should sort of keep your options open, because again, like, nobody, I think, can legitimately tell you they know what's going to happen in the next year. What we do know is that the economy will get worse before it gets better, so you should hedge against any sort of uncertainty by just keeping all your options open. And one thing I want to sort of put out as well, just to sort of plug in, skill-based stuff. A lot of, fancy universities out there all now have these courses you can take for free, right? All these websites are sort of opening up their training and stuff like that. You should really be taking advantage of all of that. I mean, think about how much money people would have paid pre-COVID to take all these classes, and that's now all free, right? And so this, if I may point out, should be a time for you to pad your resume a little bit with certain skills, while at the same time, try to stay afloat, right? So I think that's sort of what I've been hearing from a lot of business leaders, is just everybody's just trying to get through this, right? So I think for youth, you try to do that, but also keep your options open. So yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Melati. So for those who are listening, definitely check out the RYSE program. Sign up if you're interested. Also related to what she mentioned just now, MDEC is doing a program right now where you're able to sign up for, if you're unemployed, you can sign up for free Coursera courses, things from data science to digital marketing to entrepreneurship, leadership, stuff like that, right? So things that can pad your resume, make you look a bit smarter, sound a little bit smarter, right? Hopefully get you a job once things are a little bit okay, right? So check that out. So for Dr. Melati, I was just very curious, right? I mean, I'm someone who's also studied in the US, right? And I think that there are a lot of people who either studied overseas or people who are even considering to work overseas, whether it's Singapore, Australia, etc., right? What for people who are considering to do that right now, either to come back to Malaysia or even for people who are thinking about just working abroad, right? What are some economic considerations over the next 1 year, right? Like maybe you can just give me a brief overview, I guess. I know you told me earlier that you don't know exactly, but I guess maybe you can give us a picture, I guess.
So I was thinking about this a lot, actually, and I was talking to my husband about this, but I really do believe, I think as a Malaysian, that this is a fantastic time to come home. The first thing is that, and we've seen this in Malaysia as well, there's sort of this rising xenophobia towards sort of foreign workers and foreigners in any sense, right? So I think there will be, as sort of economies start getting worse, more discrimination against foreign labor of any sort of skill set, actually. And so Malaysians are foreign somewhere, right? And so I think that sort of can be a very big pull to bring people back to Malaysia, despite the fact that our wages are not as high, despite the fact that, we don't have summers and winters and stuff like that. But I think that there are sort of social aspects that might actually make it nicer to be home. So I feel like that's sort of one big consideration. And then the second thing that I think you should be thinking of, like you as a youth, is sort of, again, just keeping your options open, right? So just because the job market looks bleak now doesn't mean it's going to look bleak a year from now, right? So I don't think you should be shutting your door completely to moving back if you're from abroad, or actually going abroad if you're here, right? So I think keeping everything open is wise. But I do feel like this would be a good time to pull Malaysians back, just because of what's happening right now. Also because I think, honestly, Malaysia is a healthcare system as dealing with the COVID crisis much better. So I think than a lot of Western countries that traditionally have been stealing, draining the brains of Malaysia. So I think that just for the infection reason, I think it's a safer place to be, and also there's a lot of problems to solve, right? So there's that.
Awesome, thank you very much. Great answer. Let's go for the Q&As now, right? So we'll open it up to everyone. So I think the first one, in terms of the by Andrew Koo, in terms of the future of gig economy, I think that has been sort of answered in Shireen's discussion just now. So I don't really want to repeat that. I'm pretty sure that she's spoken about how her platform talks about EPFs and sort of having that kind of protection. But I think I want to draw to the second question then, which is the Graduates at Work program announced by the Finance Minister. To be honest, I'm quite interested in this too, and I'm not too familiar with this answer because that was announced under a previous government, right? But I don't know if that policy is going to continue or that funding is going to continue under this government, right? So not only is the question of will it reach that 350,000 jobs that it was projected to create, but is it even going to happen in the first place, right? I'm going to open this up to anyone. Does any one of you guys want to sort of like pitch in on this?
Can I just talk about what Telangkop has just done?
Sure.
And they have this initiative called Belia Bekerja. So I think that's happening through a government initiative. And they had a virtual career fair and all that. About 10,000 young people joined the career fair. You got to ask them whether they actually got jobs, but things are happening in various agencies. Creating 350,000 jobs at this stage, I think it's going to be not feasible. Let's be honest about it, right? But I agree with Dr. Melati. Find this time to actually upgrade your skills, technical skills and everything else, because there are opportunities there. Like I mentioned, the sector that are looking to recruit. So we just got to be smart about it, and the jobs are there. We just need to understand where the growth is and sort of prepare ourselves for that. If you talk about tech jobs, very simple things like content reviewer, and I asked my colleagues, what is content reviewer? You just sit in front of the screen, you have a computer, you have internet access, and then you review content for YouTube or Facebook and platforms such as that, to make sure that it doesn't have the content that they don't want to publish. So you can easily plug into those kind of jobs. I made this a gig economy kind of role, but it's something to sort of do while you are waiting for your next curve. And the opportunity is that it's still a job, whether you're a gig economy or you are in a permanent position. So I gave that very concrete example for people who can sign up and be content reviewer. And young people are doing that anyway, right? So get paid.
All right, awesome. But okay, just to clarify, does anyone know if this program is going to be continued by this current government, or is it on hold? No. Does Amirul? No. Okay, all right. We'll perhaps have to check.
Actually, I'm also looking. Yeah, actually, I've written one paper to see the impact of COVID. So on that paper, I focus a lot in terms of this is the best time for us to reskilling or upskilling our workforce. And I sort of reviewed the initiative, and when I went to the minister website, so there is no available information on that. Unfortunately, I think this is the thing that I think the government have to ensure that the information, the labor market information, has been accessible to all.
Can I just add the expectations? Sorry, can I just add about the expectations of government? I see a lot of questions about government this, government that. Actually, private sector is the largest employer, besides the civil service. We actually need to turn to private sector for them to create jobs. But the situation that we're in right now, they can't plan beyond their current sort of cash flow and all that. And you know, we always turn to government all the time. I think we need to take ownership of our own sort of development and you know, work with private sector to see the jobs coming through. Government will work with private sector anyway. So I think we should just, you know, hang that a little bit, because then give everybody the space to actually get through this and develop the kind of jobs that is needed. Private sector has got to step up.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think that's a very interesting point being brought up. Thank you very much for the responses so far. Talking about private sector, and I think the question I want to ask is this, right? How can the government restructure the economy to create more jobs that pays better, at the same time good for our country? For example, can we create more jobs for engineers, for renewable energy instead of oil and gas? So I actually very much agree with Shireen that you know that the biggest employer is the private sector, not the government. But my perspective is that a lot of the economy is controlled by GLCs, government-linked companies, and also GLICs, right? So when this is the situation, right, there is in fact a lot of influence by government policymakers into how these GLCs and GLICs function. So either it does not necessarily have to be through a legislative change. Perhaps it could be, you know, if we can do political appointments to these GLCs, you know, shouldn't it be possible to sort of advise on employment policy? So I think maybe we can take the question and perhaps widen that scope a little bit, not just governments, but GLCs and GLICs, right? How do we restructure this and shift our focus, I guess? Yeah. Let's go with Dr. Melati.
So I'm not terribly optimistic about structural reforms in this time. So I kind of, I may have to side with Shireen on this, where I think that that's going to be very difficult. I think that there's a lot, unfortunately in Malaysia, a lot of political uncertainty regarding a lot of different things. And I think leaderships at GLCs are changing. I mean, everything is changing. We were working before on a research program with the Ministry of Education, which then became Ministry of Education and Higher Education, and then now is going to be reshuffled again. And you know, our program was providing training to young kids in Semporna, right? So like kids from families who are making like 250 ringgit a month. And they can't run anymore in any form because of everything that is happening right now, right? So I would love to see structural reform. I do not see that happening in the next year or so, or at least until the next election. I don't know when that's going to be, so. Pessimistic answer, sorry.
No worries. Pessimism is appropriate sometimes, right? No worries, right? But I guess the question should be, maybe I can reword it better, right? If reform was possible, right? If we are able to imagine certain types of reform, let's say there's the political climate is right, economic climate is right. What are certain steps that should be taken by government? And I mean, especially since in your vast experience, maybe we can get Shireen to answer this.
Steps taken for government? Is that what the question?
So if reforms were these kind of reforms were possible, what are the kind of reforms that perhaps government or GLCs should take? Like if they were possible, like what are your suggestions?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I don't have a crystal ball in front of me. I wish I did. But look, the largest employer in our country is actually the SMEs. 65% of jobs are created by SMEs. So let's not forget that. GLCs and GLICs, and Amirul will attest to that as well. Of course, they're a big employer because en bloc they employ a large number of people. But the largest employer in this country is SMEs. So what should government do? I think the policies are in place. We always talk about the execution, right? So they need to work very closely with the private sector in creating the jobs, because government do not create jobs. Government create the right kind of policies so that companies can grow their businesses, and when your business grow, the jobs come. But right now, with the economy the way it is, it's global. Even in the US, the unemployment numbers are skyrocketing. So the economy is not growing, and it's not growing, then there's no jobs. It's very tough for even government to actually think about the right kind of intervention, but they have to work very closely with private sectors, who are the people who are actually creating the jobs. How do you, give them the right kind of incentives? Right now, I think they're doing the right thing to make people sort of, get them skill, go on to the, all your free courses and all that. So that's something that the government is doing while we wait for the economy to turn. Amirul, maybe you have something to say, because you're looking at it from all angles. Sorry, I'm being moderator now. I should stop.
No worries, no worries. Okay, actually, I do have a question. The next question is for Amirul, actually, so perhaps he can put it into his response to that, because we actually have a very long, but I think it's very interesting question by Huok On Lee Huok On. I hope I'm not butchering your name. Evidence suggests that a few structural aspects of youth labor participation and unemployment mostly are not spotlighted or plainly omitted from public discourse. And this is based on the Labour Force Survey Report 2019. So, for example, the youth unemployment is most acute in Sabah, where the labour force participation is at a staggering 40%, and the rest of the country is 20%. So basically almost double. So among BCI groupings, youth unemployment is most pronounced among Indian Malaysians, a 33% unemployment rate compared to 17% for Bumiputras. So the issue is not more targeted, ethnically targeted programs, or perhaps about more awareness, perception, and trust, and about self-employment and how it's risen in general. And this is regarded as empowering, but also increases vulnerability to downturns. So I guess I know it's a very tough question to answer, because it covers a lot of ground, right? But how should policy respond to these issues, right? Especially in terms of, firstly, is in terms of the reporting itself, right? In terms of the fact that these things are not highlighted or omitted from public discourse, but also how do we deal with these specific groups and create more targeted policy making? Perhaps Amirul can talk a little bit about it.
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking that the policy is not correctly targeted, is it?
Sorry. Okay. So if you can actually click the Q&A part, because it's actually quite a long question, to be honest. So I'm sort of summarizing. So the idea is that how we do reporting for certain policy points might not necessarily be very accurate, because it omits certain types of key information. For example, youth unemployment rates in Sabah, which is far worse than the rest of the country. Youth unemployment rates among the Indian community, which is far worse than any other community, which is almost double the youth unemployment rate for the Bumiputra category. And also in terms of how self-employment has risen in terms of for the youth in general, right? So these are certain key information or markers that have been omitted from our discourse, right? So how should policymakers, or how should policy respond to this issue in terms of becoming more targeted, etc.? Yeah, maybe you can expand, you can share a little bit about that.
I think in terms of targeted policy, for specifically for the like in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, I think the country has a quite a strong policy in terms of that. According to what Shireen has been saying just now, it is in terms of the implementation wise. So not to blame on the government implementation, but then this might need coordination. Overall, specific coordination in by all parties. Yeah. I think that is the best I can answer, because I'm not really into this. Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Yes,
I wanted to talk a little bit about,
yes.
So I have done work in Semporna with teenagers, actually. So these are like 16, 17-year-olds, and the very interesting thing there is that they often do not see sort of self-employment, so like entrepreneurship, like small scale, micro SMEs as being a job end up doing. So I think if you look at like sort of the breakdown of self-employment by income level, the sort of the lowest income levels tend to have sort of the highest actually amount of entrepreneurship. And I think you can argue that, well, some of that is out of necessity because people won't hire them, but some of it is actually pretty interesting, right? And I kind of wanted to sort of broaden whoever's listening's view of entrepreneurship to include problem solving, which I think that is going to be a very big thing in sort of the COVID world. So, I mean, as I was, people were talking, I was like, things we don't know. How safely? I don't know. How do we open schools safely? I don't know, right? So these are all sort of problems, and I think that if you sort of widen self-employment and sort of, I think the policy should be to sort of educate people and like, okay, like this is a problem, right? Like if you figure out a tool for people to cut their hair safely without infecting everybody, or build a program where everybody working in a warehouse or a factory don't get infected, this is something you can sell, right? People all over the world will buy this from you. And so I think sort of for the sort of the lower income youth, I think, who come from sort of underprivileged backgrounds, I think one key policy would just be sort of trying to inject more training, essentially, I think, into sort of how to frame problems, how to solve problems, how to market problems, which I think is, market solutions, which I think is going to be a big thing. So just speaking on sort of the youth part, I think skills training will be very useful.
Awesome.
In terms of definition of unemployment and how our Department of Statistics capture that, people who are studying, youth and young people who are still in university, is captured as being unemployed. Yeah. So that's why the number is rather large. So we need to then, talk to people who collect this kind of data and report it, Department of Statistics, to actually decouple that, and then we actually see the real unemployment rate in the country. So we need to understand that, because otherwise we think that there's a high unemployment rate in our youth, but actually there's a lot of our young people who are in universities, in colleges and all that, and they're lumped together as being unemployed.
Yeah, and actually one other thing, since we're talking about data, is I think one of my sort of pet peeves about Malaysia is the lack of data. So there is a severe lack of any sort of data, I think, around anything in Malaysia, right? So how can you make good policy and implement it if you don't actually know what you're dealing with? So I think that's sort of one thing that would really help, is just making data more available. I know that, certain organizations, like I think maybe like KRI perhaps has better access, but, unlike a lot of other countries where data is just available, right? They just release it and then whoever can basically use it. We don't have that here. And I think that that's kind of a really big issue in terms of, evidence-based policy, because you can't really do that. So that's a big problem, I think.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Actually, we're going back to Dr. Belati. So what are the even Amirul can go for this actually. So what are the regular, like the textbook answers for labor economics to spur job growth in this situation? And can we use those textbook solutions for these for the situation that we're in, or perhaps what parts can we use, or what parts should we do away with? Maybe Dr. Melati or Amirul can share.
I don't think a lot of the traditional ways of generating growth will help. I think one thing that could help, which I don't know that the government is doing actively, is providing companies or private companies with the incentives not to lay off their people. I think that would be something very good. One of my sort of biggest concerns would be after Raya, there would just be this like mass firing of, this is like, my nightmare. In my nightmares, this is what happens, because again, like, you're not been operating, things haven't been going back to sort of optimum, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that one thing that I would really like to see more is sort of more support of the private sector, because again, like what Shireen said, right, the private sector is the one that's hiring. If you at least cushion it a little bit so that they don't have to lay off half of the workforce, that would be great. And actually, I want to share one anecdote that I thought was very scary, was a couple weeks ago, I won't mention which company, but I was talking to the CEO of a food delivery platform, one of them, and he was telling me that from their projections, they expect 40 to 50% of F&B outlets to close in the next couple of months, right? So that's just like a staggering number. Imagine like half of the places you used to eat at don't exist anymore, right? And so how does the government sort of support this ecosystem of very small medium enterprises in order to support the workers, right? Because once the private sector collapses, people don't have money, they don't consume, and then the whole cycle kind of continues. So.
Yes, Amirul.
If I may add on the what Dr. Melati is saying, I think yes, I agree in terms of supporting to support is a support from and to the private sectors, in order for us to in order for the country to be able to provide high-skilled jobs to its workforce. I think the structural changes to the labor market and will take some time. The effect will take some time and change, but we cannot run away for creating jobs in higher value industries. So I've also seen some of the questions asking about why we are not paying the 3D jobs in Malaysia similar as what Singapore is paying. I think it is also important for us to review the country chips labor policy, which is, I think for me, it is fundamental for the country to tackle the migrant workers issues, while this can improve the jobs and income for young Malaysian and can reduce our dependency towards the 3D jobs in Singapore among our local. And it is also been pointed out that the country's adoption of technology and productivity growth and achievement of high income status has been constrained by our continuing reliance of cheap labor policy. And as a consequence, we rely much more on manpower over automation, so which reduce the overall productivity per worker. And this would also curb our possibility to be having more high skilled jobs in the country.
Okay, interesting. I want to lead on that because I think there's a question from Andrew Koo. So is it then the fault of the government for allowing employers to have access to cheap migrant workers to do the 3D work instead of allowing market forces to increase the salaries of these kind of jobs where it becomes sufficiently attractive to Malaysians? So is this basically a problem with the government policy, right? That's perhaps one aspect. Second is that what are the specific things that we can do to address this thing? Because I used to work in, I'm an engineer by training, right? I used to work in a production company as a production engineer, right? So I'm very much aware about the challenges of competing on a global scale, right? You have to lower down prices and all that. So we can't just increase the price of labor and think that that's not going to have an adverse effect onto our ability to sell, right? So how do we build? So one, is it the government's fault in terms of allowing this mass labor? But more importantly, what can we do to address these problems in a sustainable manner? What do you think, Amirul?
I think I'm not saying this is the government fault because our locals are not into this low skilled job that the migrant workers doing, because they are offering low salary. And I think for the when I go to the second questions, I think we can also in support for high skill employment creation, we can use the strategic sectors in making the best use of technology. So like, for example, our climate and location, which make us a prime candidate to benefit from the battle for global food security. I think this matter have been raised by the previous government under the leadership of Dr. Mahathir for us to venture into agriculture appear I think it appear timely. So this is among the example that we can contribute to producing or creating high income, high skilled jobs.
Can I add something?
Yep.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please feel free.
So I think there is a sense now in which, you know, we have, if you consider the sort of migrant worker population overall, right? I think estimates are like 1.5 to like 8. I've seen estimates that are like 8 million people, right? And so they do, you know, mainly invisible jobs that we don't really see them sometimes. But I think what is sort of crucial here is that it's very dangerous to push Malaysians into these 3D jobs at this time because they may never get out. So I sort of, one of my big fears, I think, in sort of the you know, like, don't hire migrant workers to do this, hire a Malaysian, is, you know, instead of sort of pushing Malaysians to these jobs, I think we should be pushing them, instead of pushing them to be the labor that is, you know, doing all the work, they should be the ones handling the machines that do the work, right? We should sort of be moving higher up on the tech supply chain rather than sort of pushing people down. And one other sort of concern for vulnerable populations is that the people who you will push into these jobs are going to be people who, you know, the sort of B40s of the world, right? The people who really will have a lot of trouble with social mobility, already do, and will even have even more once they're pushed into these jobs. So I think to me, when I hear, you know, we Malaysians should take up these jobs and these janitorial jobs and, you know, sell, like, wake up at 2 a.m. and sell like sayur at the market, that to me is very worrying, because I don't think we should be going that route. I think we should be going the South Korea, sort of the tech route, instead of sort of going on that route. And then the second thing I wanted to mention also is that, you know, people say that, oh, well, you know, maybe if I was paid like 2005 to be a sweeper, I would do it instead of like minimum wage, right? That's something you hear a lot, right? The pay is too low. One thing I think that we're not thinking about here is social status. So there are certain jobs that I think a lot of Malaysians would never do, even if it pays, you know, reasonably well, because it's sort of associated with, you know, like, not a good enough job per se, right? So I'll give you one example. So I have 2 kids. I often try to find people to take care of my kids, like babysitting jobs. In the US, I could just pay a college student to come and do some chores around the house and take care of my kids for a couple hours. It is almost impossible to find that help in Malaysia on an hourly basis. I mean, it's amazing. Like, you pay well, and they're like, no, like, I'm not, you know, what are you talking about? I have a degree. I can't do this job. And it's like, I'm paying you really well. You just have to watch TV for 2 hours, right? So I think there's sort of this like social status idea where people will not take jobs even if they pay well. So that's something else to think about with regards to that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those are very interesting points, I think. To be honest, I really want to lean into this question because I think it's very interesting. Perhaps I want to listen a little bit from Shireen, because I think you mentioned a little bit about SMEs earlier, right? In terms of the number of jobs that SMEs are creating. So I think especially within the Malaysian context, a lot of these foreign workers are employed by SMEs for things like construction, production, etc., right? How do we then help? How do we create policies, or perhaps you can share what are policies in place to help that transition to become more technologically enhanced? So perhaps you can share, if there are no policies now, what are policies that we could perhaps implement?
There are some policies already. I think where the government, and going back to policies, it's in the realm of government, is that pushing our sort of young people, even our talent across the board, to be more high skilled. I agree with Dr. Melati. You know, Malaysians don't want to do the back-breaking work in a plantation, for example, and you don't want them to do those things. You want them to do the research. You want them to do the skills in the machining and all that. So we need to move, because a lot of our population, if you look at the division of skills, we are still very high in the low skilled bracket. The mid skill, we need to improve. The high skill is a smaller sort of percentage. I have the data in my slides. I will share it, and you can look at that. So we need to push towards having higher skill, and the policy is actually looking at that. We still need to be dependent on foreign workers for the jobs that we don't want to do. And Melati just hit it on the nail. Even if I pay you 5,000 ringgit, do you want to do the back-breaking work of in the plantations and all that? No, we're not going to do that. So the reality is that we're still going to be dependent on foreign workers. Policies are already in place to actually then move us towards more skilled jobs, create more skilled jobs. and for SMEs to actually move up the value chain. Our SMEs are still at the lower end of the value chain. So when you push SMEs towards the higher value chain, and then you have the talent who are already skilled, then it's almost seamless that we all move in the same direction. So then the push for government is to actually have a lot of incentives for SMEs to mechanize their operations, to actually then start employing skills, to do apprenticeship programs for people to then work and gain the skills and then sort of upgrade themselves. So it is in place. We need to know, the information needs to be out there a lot more. And I accept there's a lot more that needs to be done.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so interesting point. Then there needs to be more in terms of the incentives to ensure by government to SMEs in particular to enhance mechanization and that skills training program. Great, thank you. So also, I think this is another very important, I guess, general question. I want to get the thoughts of anyone who wants to chip in, right? So the question is, why isn't there any proposals for a New Deal style stimulus to create jobs in discussion about weathering COVID in Malaysia? Because according to this person, the government always seems to lean into GLCs to create jobs. For example, the Prodigy program. But what about the role of the government in terms of creating this stimulus package in regards to this new digital economy? So I guess one is what has the government been doing? Second is, in your experience, what should the government be doing in particular? I'm open to anyone, but maybe we can go with Dr. Melati first.
Think on this a little bit. You should go for somebody else first.
Okay, sure. I will go. Okay, let's go with Amirul then, because I think Shireen just spoke just now. Let's go with Amirul then. Sorry, I think you're muted, Amirul. Yep.
The question again?
Okay. So the question is that why isn't there a proposal for perhaps a new deal style stimulus to address this COVID recession that we're facing, and sort of try to restructure, because I think we've had a lot of ideas, right, in terms of addressing SMEs, increasing up the value chain, right, trying not to disrupt things in terms of foreign worker situation, right? So that there's a lot of discussions, right? But I think perhaps there needs to be some sort of grand idea. So why isn't this being done yet? One, and second, if you could do it, what are some policies or what are some directions that you hope would be implemented in terms of addressing these concerns that we've discussed throughout panel today? Sorry, Amirul is frozen.
Yeah. I passed the question first. Sorry. Okay.
So I guess we are also passing the question.
Yeah.
Wait, Amirul, are you right? Is your...
Yeah, I'm okay, but I'm looking for the question, for the answer. Sorry.
Sure. Maybe Shireen, I see you've unmuted yourself. So I hope you can just try to do a stab at it.
I'm just going to be naughty and throw the question back to the person who asked it. What are his ideas on this New Deal? I'd like to hear that as well. I know there's a wealth of a lot of people with experience and expertise and knowledge. What do you guys think is the New Deal? I think government has done enough with the prihatin, protecting wages for people who earn 5,000 ringgit and below for the young ones, and then there's another bracket that's getting the incentive, but that's short term. But like Melati says, that's the cushion that the private sector needs. Then there's other things for them to help manage the cash flow, right? But in the next couple of months, we're going to run out of all the government incentives. People now need to
not
think
already.
about the solution. We have already, right? It's
Yeah.
done deal. So that's the deal. So we need to come up with better solution and really then support each other on how we grow jobs and all that. Because government is one block, like I said, private sector is the other block. and then civil society. How do we galvanize everybody towards the, coming for that solution or working on that solution? So the person who asked the question.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the reason why I hesitated was that I don't really have an answer. I would like to hear what people think about this. I mean, I don't think there's one sort of, one answer that fits all. I did want to mention, though, that I do think that our economy will probably still rely on foreign workers, migrant workers, for the foreseeable future, just because I think people don't realize the sort of vastness of how many there are. Malaysia, because we're not very good at keeping documentation, we don't actually know, right? So again, like I've seen estimates up to 8 million, and the workforce in Malaysia is only 15 million. So it could be that there are, 50% of the Malaysian workforce in magnitude is actually migrant workers. So I don't think that there can be reforms to completely get rid of reliance on foreign workers, but I think that perhaps one issue that has come up is sort of how do we take care of, how do we ensure that, the sort of, we haven't talked about inequality very much yet, but sort of the equality aspects and sort of the humane aspects of migrant workers is taken care of, but I don't see us not relying on migrant workers. That's just not going to happen, I think.
Okay, all right. Does Amirul want to take a stab at that? Like in terms of this New Deal, or how do we deal with the problems of the future or the near future?
I don't have any specific answer for that, but I saw a question specifically mentioned my name here in relation to apprenticeship program. So I think post-COVID, we should, as I mentioned earlier, we should focus on equipping youth with an opportunity to up or reskilling. So this is also has been mentioned by Dr. Melati and Shirin as well before. In my paper, we have reviewed a few of our training program that have been introduced by the government. One of the program that we think should be re-implemented is on One Malaysia training program, the SLIM module, and this should be expanded to all the ministries and government agencies. And I'm quite happy to say that I recently I've read the KBS announcement on the they wanted to introduce the scheme apprenticeship national, which I think quite similar with SLIM, but they are designed as an intercollegiate, which would allow the apprenticeship to move to other ministries or agencies in a particular period. So this is among the crucial, I mean, the important steps that to ensure that our youth have been taken care during the crisis, just to ensure that they despite of having longer unemployment, so at least they have something to do in terms of reskilling and upskilling. Of course, the issues of wages and training allowance is crucial to ensure that our youth or the apprentice could survive and support their daily expenses. I think the government have already a good program like the dual national training program and the structured internship program, which provide a win-win situation like a tax deduction, which could incentivize the companies to participate in this program, and which later will encourage them to pay the fair monthly allowance to the apprentice. But in my paper, we specifically suggesting that the government should introduce the allowance not only to the to those who are doing apprenticeship or training in the government sector, should be expanded to those who are doing their training in the private sectors as well. Yep.
Armel,
awesome.
can I say one thing about structure? I just thought about something that I would like to see, which
Sure, but maybe a little bit brief, I guess. Yeah.
okay, very, very briefly. Okay, so
Alright.
there was, I was just browsing through the Q&A. So one thing that, you know, is shared prosperity dead. I think that one thing,
I was just going to address that actually, but yeah.
Okay. So I think, you know, I keep on, the best thing I've heard about this COVID thing is like, we're all in the same storm, but we're in very different boats, right? Some of us are in sort of like golden gilded boats and some of us are on rafts, right? But I do think that one reform that I would like to see is actually increase taxing the rich more. In Malaysia, it is not as though we do not have rich people. We have tons of rich people. It's that I think our tax structure could be changed a little bit in terms of redistribution. And I think that that would be something that I would like to see, because I think that perhaps redistribution and sort of the tax base hasn't been talked about very much, I feel, in sort of the press, but something that could be done is, you know, redistribute that way. Malaysia has a very small tax base. A lot of people don't pay taxes, but you know, for those who do and who make a lot of money, that is one way for you to raise revenue, right? To channel to better programs. So yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I think that's something that that should be addressed. I think in terms of responding to inequalities. So okay, we're running out of time. I'll be taking like one, maybe two last questions if I have time. But right, let's talk about this, right? From Chandralekha. So the impact of COVID-19 has an unequal toll on many segments of the community, as Dr. Melati pointed out earlier, right? And ironically enough, the government has used a female representative, Machikia, as an example to explain economic policies in response to COVID-19. So what are we doing to ensure that we are addressing these minority groups, for example, women, minorities, disadvantaged groups, and given minority-based female-dominated industries like retail, hospitality, education, and healthcare are the ones mostly hit? And also, how can or what can we do to ensure that there is an equal representation of women and other minority groups in COVID-19 response and planning and decision-making, so that these segments of society, of young people, are not left behind? Perhaps I can hear a little bit from Shireen, in terms of, you know, maybe not just the government sector, right? Also, because I think you pointed out, right, private sector plays a role. So how do we ensure this kind of representation, and how do we ensure like these groups are addressed by both major stakeholders over here? Shireen?
Sorry, the mute button. Women in the workforce, women are highly skilled, women are highly educated, but they leave the workforce due to all sorts of reasons. So a better representation is the right kind of policies to bring women back into the workforce, and then, you know, and then they move up into decision-making roles. So in Talent Corp, we champion that quite a bit, bringing women back into the workforce and restarting their careers. So we need to do a lot more of those kind of programmatic things, and you will see it not today, maybe you know, it's a midterm kind of a strategy. Right now, our curve is that women get into the workforce, they're highly qualified, and then they have you know, family roles, and then they just, you know, leave the workforce and they're missing. So it's a very important point. Thank you for bringing it up, because then we're missing half of the workforce. It's not a gender thing. It's not even a minority thing. It's about people who are skilled and highly educated and they're not in the economy. So those kind of programs need to continue. I think, you know, and employers also need to actually open up and be a bit more progressive in the way they think about the workforce in totality, and start employing people with the skills and the expertise, and, you know, bring them into the workforce. Sometimes they want the person to be, you know, working for a certain number of time, and when they leave for family reasons or for you know, those kind of important things, they don't really want to recruit these women back into the workforce. So the mentality and the mindset of HR people in the private sector needs to change dramatically as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so I'm going to try to squeeze in one last question, because I think it's an important one that we haven't really covered necessarily, right? Especially since Dr. Melati raised the question of entrepreneurship, right? So instead of looking at the labor market from a supply and demand side, why aren't there more programs to spur entrepreneurship? And the available jobs aren't necessarily what graduates want to do. I want to extend this question a little bit because I think there are a lot of like entrepreneurship grants, right? But I just want to try to understand, from an economics perspective, are there certain types of barriers that we aren't looking at that's stopping people from being able to become entrepreneurs, right? Because in different countries, there's a different rate of entrepreneurship, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's holding back Malaysians necessarily, Dr. Melati?
So I think one thing that is going to be a big barrier and will be, sort of a point of success for a lot of people is the ability to digitalize. So I think in sort of this sort of highly connected, socially distant world, entrepreneurs who are able to digitalize and sort of do things in a way where, sort of low, no contact, but can deliver you what you need, can kind of get you the product that solves problems, that solves your particular problem, I think will be the ones that succeed. And I think it's going to be hard for a lot of micro SMEs to do that. Now, we just had Raya, right? So one big happening with the Ramadan bazaars, right? So like all the people selling the kueh and all the your aitabu and all that stuff, right? So I think there was sort of a big push for a lot of them to, get onto Food Panda, get onto a platform, get onto the e-bazaar rakyat thing. But a lot of them were sort of could not do that, right? Because of maybe spotty internet, maybe did not know how, too long of a sort of waiting time on the platform to be approved, etc. Right? So I think that as we progress through this COVID problem, I think the ability to tap into technology to sort of get your product to the masses is going to be a big deal.
Awesome, thank you very much. All right, so it's already 10, so I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much to all three panelists. I thought the answers were great. I thought we touched on a lot of variety of very important points: entrepreneurship, the role of government versus private sector, even within private sector, GLCs versus the role of SMEs. How do we structure our education system better, right? Do we really need that many graduates? How do we do better skills trainings, right? I think these are very important questions that we need to be able to answer, especially in looking at this new world that we live in, especially post-COVID. How do we increase digitization? How do we increase better skill sets and technology adoption by companies, right? These are real questions that need to be answered. So thank you very much for everyone for joining us. These are real issues that we have to face together as a country. Something for us to think about. And you can check out some of the programs that were mentioned, including from Dr. Melati's programs, if you guys are interested in being an entrepreneur. Right, so I'm going to hand it over to Ivy to sort of wrap it up for tonight. But thank you very much to all the panelists, and thank you from me also. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tama, and thank you everyone for coming to our webinar. I think we can end the webinar already.
Awesome. All right. Selamat Hari Raya, everyone. Sorry, I forgot to mention it earlier.
Selamat Hari Raya. Thank you.
Guys, take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.